Okay, now why don't you go to the essay on Aran Islands, a short one, short essay about half a dozen pages, and read along. It'll take about 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes if you read it very quickly. Okay, let's do it. It takes a lot of time reading it. Okay, let's read it together. It's better, right? Elaine Sisson, The Aran Islands and Travel Essays. The title of the book, novel, etc., plays, should be in italics like this. The Aran Islands, right? The Aran Islands and the travel essays. One wonders in these places why anybody's left in Dublin or London or Paris when it would better, one would think, to live in a tent or hut with this magnificent air, which is like wine in one's teeth. Beautiful, right? Are you a traveler? Have you stayed outdoors? Right. During the night, right? It's fine, right? Particularly in summer, right? In a letter to Lady Gregory dated August 1905, Singh revealed that the Blasket Islands of the Dingle Peninsula in West Kerry were the most interesting place he had ever been. So now you know the place, right? If you go to Ireland, be sure to visit Dingle Peninsula, the Blasket Island. The close association of Singh with the Aran Islands in Galway through his plays and prose writings has meant that his emotional and spiritual connection to the basket is often overlooked. Part of the fascination with the Kerry Islands was the almost complete absence of English as a spoken language. And as he writes to Lady Gregory, the necessity of being thrown back on my Irish entirely in order to communicate. The Irish language is woven into the topography of the landscape with the name of every hillock, inlet, outcrop, carrying a local history of meaning. Singh's travel essays are acutely attuned to the landscape. From the Brackish to Mayo, from Wicklow to Connemara, he documents the geography of the land as keenly as he records his conversations with local people. Singh's travel essays collected under the title in Wicklow, West Kerry, and Connemara, 1910, published 1910. His long prose piece on his Aran sojourns, the Aran Islands, we have so far covered, right? Illustrate how he can be understood as an Irish modernist. The concept of modernity is sometimes misunderstood as a descriptor of what is current and contemporary, but often paradoxically, modernity is concerned as much with the past as with the present. Modernity has a general face, one side turned towards progress, the other towards tradition. Yeah, very good expression, right? Modernism, one of the aesthetics discourse of modernity, may display a seemingly primitive interest in folk culture as well as a desire for the new. This tension between the authentic and the progressive is at the heart of much of Irish revivalist writing and culture. Probably Matthew will talk about this, revivalist. While many revivalists' work displays sentimentalized yearning for more authentic times, the very act of photographing, documenting, recording, and describing rapidly disappearing passing ways of life, as seen in the works of Sy, Patrick Pearse, Lady Gregory, for example, is in itself part of the technocratic apparatus of modernity. This essay situates Singh's travel essays and his work on the Aran Islands within some of the emergent discourses of modernity, such as photograph, ethnography, anthropology, documentary realism. Singh's work avoids the sentimentality found in much revivalist writing on the west of Ireland in particular, and it shows an easy nostalgia for the past. As a realist, he recognized that social conditions of poverty may be elevated through economic innovation and agricultural technology. Yet, what prevents Singh's travel essays from being solely journalistic comment is its humane, poetic, and lyrical style, lyrical eye. Do you think so? I agree. These shorter pieces are abundant with the images of the landscape and topography of Ireland and of people's lives, which are shared rather than observed. The Aran Islands also records Singh's growing sensibility as an artist. The writing's discursive mode is both documentary and autobiography, describing events and places, but also recording an inner consciousness, which is poetic, reflective, and at times elegiac. You agree, right? You felt it, but you couldn't describe this way, right? Elaine is good. Born into late 19th century urban village, Singh belongs to that class of European gentlemen for whom culture and learning was accumulated in the great cities of the world. He started his education in Dublin and traveled to London, Paris, as men of his class tended to do. In Paris, Singh studied at the Sorbonne, read extensively in European literature. Really? I didn't know he attended Sorbonne. Records show he was reading Wagner, Pater, Wilde, Wordsworth, as well as contemporary French literature, Baudelaire, Verlaine, Maupassant, and Flaubert. The Singh, whom Yeats met in Paris, 1896, was struggling to articulate himself in the language of the material he was reading. Actually, Singh wanted to be a critic of French literature, right? That of the epithet and the urbane scholar poet. When he revealed to Yeats that he had some knowledge of the Irish language from his time studying at Trinity College Dublin, TCD, right? One professor coming, right? Matthew. Yeats urged Singh to go to the Aran Islands. Perhaps I would have given the same advice to any young Irish writer who knew Irish, recollected Yeats. For I have been that summer upon Inishmaan, the middle-sized island, Inishmaan and Inishmore, and was full of the subject. Yeats' exhortation to Singh to find a life that had not yet been expressed in literature rang true to the young man who was writing second-hand pastiches of a kind of life already well documented within contemporary literature. So it's a good advice, right? As Yeats also astutely observed, the work Singh had written in Paris was as of a man trying to look out a window and blurring all that he sees by breathing upon the window. Released from his unfulfilled literary life in Paris, Singh returned to Ireland. Yet, when he first went to Iran in 1896, his European sensibility accompanied him. In his baggage was a story of Flaubert, Madame Bovary. Interesting, right? An edition of Gabrielle Rossetti's poems. Rossetti, right? One of the pre-Raphaelites. And works by Swedenborg and the Breton ethnographer Pierre Loti. Singh had experienced the life of the urban flaneur, the cultured existence of the financially independent gentleman scholar. Yet, right? No pages, so remember this. I think it's right. Cultured existence of financially independent scholar. Yet, his life was discontented, and he was unable to capture his joys and decadence and ennui in writing as effectively as had Baudelaire or Rimbaud. Singh traveled to Iran 5 times between 1898 to 1901. His first journey to the Inishmore, the biggest island, in May 1896, and after 2 weeks there, took a boat to Inishmaan, staying with Patrick MacDonough, whose son, Merton, became his tutor. By late 1896, he had returned to Paris and stayed in Europe until May of the next year. That autumn, in September 1896, he revisited Oran, staying for a month. He didn't return for a full year, owing in part to the first appearance of the symptoms of Hodgkin's disease, when he then spent another month in the autumn of 1900, mostly in Inishore. In his fourth trip in 1901, he spent almost 3 weeks dividing his time between the Inishmore and Inishore, and returned a few weeks later for his fifth and last trip in late October 1901, staying for the entire time on Inishore. By late 1901, Synge had finished writing The Aran Islands, although it remained unpublished until 1907. So, this paragraph contains all the important biographical details. So, to be a scholar, what do you have to do? You have to do a lot of research, right? Put them together like this, right? Good, impressive, right? Synge's many trips to Aran had been in private capacity. He was enthralled by the landscape, the language, and the people. However, his essays on other parts of Ireland, published collectively as in Wicklow, West Kerry, and Connemara, served a more public, even at times political agenda. Although, for the most part, Synge traveled alone, writing and publishing his thoughts in the literary magazines. In 1905, he was commissioned by the Manchester Guardian newspaper to write on aspects of Irish rural life. So this is how he made money, right? By writing, right, for the newspaper. C.P. Scott, the editor, asked Synge and Jack B.H. Jack B.H.'s younger brother, William Buckley H., W.B.H. He is the greatest, probably he is the greatest painter of Ireland, right? Jack B.H., the illustrator, to travel to the congested districts of Connemara and North Mayo to record the devastation of the region, which had suffered the famine for the fourth time in 15 years. In 1897, the newspaper had been involved in a previous relief efforts, initiating the highly successful Manchester Relief Fund, a private charitable drive to help the congested districts board eliminate starvation. Yeats's and Synge's commission was in part to update the Manchester Guardian readers on the effect, if any, of the area relief works. They also traveled to Spiddal, County Galway, and Swinford, County Mayo, recording for the newspaper the impressions of prevailing social and economic conditions. In all, Synge and the Yeats had 12 illustrated articles published in the Manchester Guardian. Very interesting. I'd like to have a look at the illustrations and do a paper on Jack Yeats' illustrations for the essays written by Synge, right? It must be a very good topic, right? I got a topic, right? The travel essays reveal different aspects of Synge, the writer. He is poet. Yes, last time, on Monday, we read poems by Synge, right? Do you find them good? Yeah, good, yeah. He is poet, journalist, social commentator, naturalist, religist, traveler. They are divided into 3 sections. The writings on Wicklow are the most relical and least journalistic, really. The West Kerry essays are vivid and expressive, evoking the type of expansive language and wildness to be found in Synge's dramatic writings. The Connemara pieces, written while traveling with Jack Yeats, are social comment and reportage commissioned by the Manchester Guardian. In his solitary trip to Wicklow and Kerry, Synge does not so much travel through Ireland as within it. He sleeps in ditches, rests lying by the side of the road, hiking through bogs, up heather-sided mountains. Along with his journey, he meets fellow companions of the road, often walking aimlessly, engaged by the conversation, and with ear turned to local turns of phrase. Synge writes that tramp life invites a particular way of thinking about the world that is akin to the artist. Actually, I got a print artwork by Jack Yeats. It's a description of a tramp and he is working alone on the street, and it's an interesting work. It's a real thing given by my advisor, professor. Right. About 5 years ago, I invited her to give a talk here, and she looked for a gift, and she decided to give it to me. I got the real thing, right, by Jack Yates. Singh writes that Trump life imbies a particular way of thinking about the world that is akin to the artist. Interesting, right? In all the circumstances of this Trump life, he writes in The Vagrants of Wicklow, there is a certain wildness that gives it romance and peculiar value for those who look at life in Ireland with an eye that is aware of the arts also. As Alan Price noted, Singh saw similarities between the position of the artist society and nomadic life of the vagrant, both symbolizing marginality yet freedom. Closer in spirit to Walt Whitman than to Baudelaire. Walt Whitman, do you know? American poet, great poet. Singh, as Trump, is the antithesis of the sophisticated urban gentleman and the anticipated Charles Chaplin and Samuel Beckett's use of Trump as a paradoxical figure within modernity. Right. Samuel Beckett later is to receive Nobel Prize. Right. Is he the Yeats? And then who gets Nobel Prize after Yeats? Bernard Shaw, maybe. And Singh is one of them. And Srimasini recently, Paul. Another one? Right, that's it, right? James Joyce didn't get it. Probably he's the greatest novelist, but he didn't get it. And Yeats was the second recipient of Nobel Prize in English literature. In English literature, the first one was what? The Indian, who was Indian English novelist, who wrote Jungle Books. Right. Closer in spirit to Walt Whitman than Baudelaire, Singh as Trump is the antithesis of the sophisticated urban gentleman and the anticipated Charles Chaplin. Interesting. And Samuel Beckett's use of Trump as a paradoxical figure within modernity. Working from Singh's text and photographs, Jack Yates provided the pen and ink illustration for the publication of Singh, The Vagrants of Wicklow. Visually, drawing attention to the tramp as anti-plein air. Yeats' Vagrant has all this ease and stature of the cultured man of leisure. His clothes are threadbare, although his stance is elegant and debonair, with cocked hat and a blackthorn stick in the place of dandy's cane. The Manchester Guardian articles are first-hand journalistic observations drawn with a poet's eye. Singh chronicles the lives he sees without a sentiment or a sanctification in essays such as From Galway to Corumman. In Speedo, for example, he noticed tidy groups of girls sitting out by the hour, near enough to the road to see everything that was passing, yet far enough away to keep their shyness undisturbed. Their clothes with their red petticoats are peculiarly beautiful against the green grass with the splendor behind them of the strip of sea and in the distance the grey cliffs of Clare. Yet earlier in the journey he had observed rushed, emancipated people pinched with hunger and the fear of it. All through the congested district, he remarks on the bureaucratic meddling with impacts on local people's ability to make a sustainable living. Manchester Guardian articles show Singh to be a compassionate and realistic social investigator, mindful of the responsibility of representing people with honesty yet respect. For example, he exposes the myth that local people are lazy by illustrating that what may seem to be unwilling to participate in cultural schemes is often prudence based on local experience of the inhospitable landscape. The inner lands of Mayo cites the failed forestation of Kana and Connemara as a good example of experts dictating schemes for areas without adequate knowledge of local land conditions. Instead, Singh suggests practical remedies that might be undertaken, such as the supplying of good quality manure, new seed potatoes, the extension of land purchases, and the improvement of rail and ceilings. Adele Dorsema has noted that although Singh's writings on Connemara and Mayo reprise the exhilarating strangeness, he had also encountered, among the people of Wicklow and West Kerry, his investigative writing in the Manchester Guardian is more restrained. Perhaps the mind of his liberal English readership, he refrains from recounting the types of wilder episodes which he witnesses in West Kerry and in Wicklow. In The Vagrants of Wicklow, Singh recounts an altercation between local people and the police, in which a drunken flower woman rips her cloth from her back in fury at her ill treatment. At a circus in Dingle, he records how a group of wild hillside people, fish women and drunken sailors, surged into the circus tent until 3 or 4 of the women performers ran out from behind the scenes and threw themselves into the crowd, forcing back the intruders and demonstrating in an extraordinary tumult of swelling, wrestling, and laughter. These keenly observed sketches of the energies, passions, and chaos of Irish life are entirely missing from the domesticated, sanitized description of rural life found in much revivalist writing. Although at times Singh can be idealistic, he is rarely sentimental, and more importantly, he doesn't shy away from dealing with the underbelly of impoverishment. He chronicles dirt, violence, alcohol abuse, neglect, hunger, brutality with a candor that is missing from the writings of his contemporaries. Good. Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Singh's immersion in rural life as a traveler rather than a revivalist tourist means that his travel writing largely escapes the romanticism often found in contemporary narratives on the rural island. The tendency within revivalism to privilege the rural over the urban created discourses of romantic nationalism, which locate rural life as a repository of spiritual authenticity. The investment in the authenticity of the rural within revivalism is in keeping with the larger European-wide interest in folk culture as an aspect of the modernist concern with primitivism. The nationalist demand for the authentic, as expressed through a search of the true and the real and the original island, was firmly focused on the west of Ireland as the locale of true nationalist life, which also had the effect of throwing an essentializing eye on the people who lived there. The commonly held revivalist conception was that the west of Ireland had a mystical quality lacking in other parts of the country where English prevailed. Consequently, an interest in the Irish language and literature, rural regeneration, and the folk primitivism of peasant life meant that the privileging of the west of Ireland over the urban centers of Anglicization was central to cultural nationalist discourse. The appellation Irish Island, first coined by the journalist and writer D.P. Moran, made a distinction between real Ireland and, by definition, Irishness, as being rural and Irish-speaking, and the domesticated Ireland, which was urbanized and Anglicized. In Moran's book, The Philosophy of Irish Ireland, 1905, in which he outlined these differences, is a polemical manifesto for the future of a Gaelicized Ireland. The Gaelic League had already been in existence for more than 10 years, ever since the Gaelicized plea for the revival of Irish had sown the seeds for its establishment in 1893. However, Moran felt that the Gaelic League's efforts in revitalizing Irish had neglected to address the underlying social and economic realities which linked poverty to the decline of Irish language. His understanding that rural Ireland's cultural disenfranchisement from his past had contributed to his state of social and economic impotence was a radically articulate insight into the decline of the Irish language. In his vehement distaste for what he disparaged as the drawing room literary revivalism of the Celtic Twilight, he argued that urban-based and Anglophone appraisals of Ireland's culture were embedded within establishment discourse and prejudices. Unfairly for Singh, Buran initially included him as part of this urban literary coterie, which neglected to take into account two important factors in Singh's favor. The first was Singh's knowledge of the Irish language, which was far superior to Buran's. Right. So Buran's appraisal of Singh is superficial, right? And the second, his articles for the Manchester Guardian, which diagnosed many of the same ills as Moran. In fact, Moran and Singh shared points in common, as both men recognized the need to address questions of cultural and economic poverty as a crucial factor in regenerating rural Ireland. If you go to Ireland, you see that signs, street, the road signs, all of them are in two languages, Irish first and English. But most people speak English there. Right? Despite Moran's polemical attacks on bourgeois revivalism, the Aran Islands continued to attract interest from enthusiastic nationalists in search of Irish Ireland. So many writers visited Aran Island. Right? Singh's appetite for journalism and his capacity for incisive social comment are not as much in evidence in the Aran Islands, which was, of course, written prior to his visit to the congested districts for the Manchester Guardian. Consequently, Aran Island sits more easily as a revivalist text evoking the islands as a piece of spiritual purity and artistic inspiration of topographic otherness and wild beauty as an outpost of Gaelic oral civilization. Good, right? There was a long-established expeditionary traffic to Aran well before Singh first made his way there in 1898. The Aran Islands had been the subject of archaeological and ethnographic academic inquiries as far back as 18th century to study linguistics, to study the Gaelic language. Only there you can find the original language. So many linguists went there. The islands had long exerted a fascination to antiquarians, but in the 1890s, the new science of anthropology also expressed an interest in investigating ethnic strains in the Irish population to identify an original or authentic Irish type. However, the early studies of Aran Islands were concerned with antiquities and archaeology rather than with an investigation of ethnicity. Studies of lifestyle, folklore, and local culture as part of anthropological inquiry did not emerge until the late 1880s. The earliest recorded academic field trips to the island are T.J. Westrop's notes on Connaught and Clare, especially the Aran Islands in Sligo, in the late 18th century. Later visitors to the islands include George Patry, John O'Flaherty in the 80s, 1820s, which resulted in Flaherty's publication of a sketch of the history and antiquities of the Southern Isles of Aran in 1824. In the 1830s, the antiquarian John O'Donovan arrived on behalf of the Ordnance Survey of Ireland. Cultural interest aroused by young Islanders in the 1840s, consider Thomas Davis' rousing line, the Western Wake, the Western Wake, inspired an increased curiosity in archaeological sites around Ireland generally, but in particular on Aran. After the 1850s, trips began with increasing regularity as local fishermen rowed boatloads of historians, archaeologists, philologists, antiquarians to and from the island. So Samuel Ferguson, Whitley Stokes, Eugene O'Cully, John Wendell, Charles Hartshorne all conducted the expedition to the island during 1850s. The most extensive historical, architectural, and archaeological study of the islands during that period was Martin Haverty's study for the Irish Association. Haverty's report, The Aran Islands, was first published in 1857 and later reprinted due to its popularity in 1859. Nicolas Goldenboy has suggested that the Haverty study provided a sort of structured search for the vernacular, which artists, archaeologists, historians increasingly favor. Okay, I'll skip to the next paragraph. The significance of Aran to cultural nationalists was not only in its association with early Christian monastic settlements like those of Saint Enda and within all the pre-Christian civilization. The remains of Christian settlements on Aran, coupled with the island's mystical pagan history, fed the imaginations of literary revivalists. Cultural nationalism dictated the Aran Islands take on the properties of the imaginary islands of mythology, as well as the transcendently imaged islands of medieval Christianity. From the late 19th century, there had been a steady stream of nationalists seeking cultural absolution in the islands, holy wells, peasant cabins, monastic sites. William Butler Yeats and Arthur Symons were among the first of these to go in 1896. Visits were localized and cultural tourists tended to go to the same places as each other. The fact that Singh and Pierce share the same language teacher, Marianne MacDonough, albeit on different trips, suggests just how localized trips were. Lady Gregory recounts her territorial indignation at finding a stranger on a beloved Inishmore. She recorded in the English Review that she was staying on Aran. Gathering folklore, Lady Gregory, right? Gathering folklore, talking to the people, felt quite angry when I passed another outsider walking here and there, talking also to the people. I was jealous of not being alone on the island among the fishers and the seaweed gatherers. I did not speak to the stranger, nor was he inclined to speak to me. He also looked on me as an intruder. I only heard his name. It was Singh. Nationalist pilgrimage seeking primitive cultural purity coincided with the expedition of modern scientific nature. Hadson's expedition between 1891 and 1893 marked the first modern anthropological trip, which used anthropometric instruments and photographs to catalog physical types. Haddon studies in his, okay, I'll jump to the next paragraph. Abel, right? Abel Dorsimer has noted that although Singh's writings on Connemara and Mayo reply the exhilarating strangeness he had already encountered among the people of Wicklow and... Am I right? I'm going forward? I think so, right? Okay. Let's skip two paragraphs. Let's go to appellation. Skip two paragraphs, and then the appellation. You see it? Yeah, let's go to, okay. Okay, the last page, okay? Let's go to the last page, and the front page, the first paragraph. Singh, You found it? Okay. Singh's writings demonstrate quite beautifully what James Clifford has coined the ethnographic allegory. Clifford suggests that ethnographic writing about people and culture has an allegorical function which transcends mere observation or documentary, and which is capable of making moral, ideological, and even cosmological statements. Singh's description of a funeral on Englishman captures in material detail the habits and rituals of islanders' customs and infers larger existential questions from what he sees. He observes how the coffin is carried out, sewn loosely in sailcloth and held near the ground by 3 crosspoles lashed upon the top. The older women, wearing their petticoats pulled up tight around their heads, join the family procession as they weave their way down to the graveyard. Gathered around the coffin, the older women begin to keen and sing in tunes how the keening articulates the whole passionate rage that lurks somewhere in every native of the island. In this instant, he sees how the cry lays bare the inner consciousness of the people and reveals the mood of beings who feel their isolation in the face of a universe that was on them with wind and seas. Between the simplicity of the grave and the mumbled Catholic prayers, Singh deliberates on the cries of pagan desperation and the pitiable despair before the horror of fate that the present death reveals. Robin Skelton, a scholar, biographer of Singh, Skelton noted that Singh was a time-haunted man with an acute sense of his mortality because of his chronic poor health. His familiarity with illness gave him a discriminating awareness of the physical hardships of the lives of the rural people, recognizing that if he hadn't been born into the comforts of his social class, he might never have survived infancy. As Clifford argues, and Singh demonstrates, that transcendent meanings are not just reflective interpretations added on to the writing or reading of the initial simple event. They are intrinsic to the meaning of the event itself. In the Aran Islands, the islanders become a human ideal existing outside of territory, transformed from the local into the universal. Singh was sufficiently aware to realize that his presence on the island brought a threat of change and hastened the progress of modernization. Yet, as Hibbert notes, it did not prevent him from bringing different kinds of technology to the Aran Islands, including an alarm clock for the people. They don't need an alarm clock, actually, right? Alarm clock, who measure their day's routines by movement of sun and shadow, right? You remember, right? Singh's interest in the roughly new technology of photography was, on the one hand, a method of capturing and disappearing culture, and yet, on the other, it illustrated to local people their geographic isolation and lack of sophistication. The photograph, as an apparatus of modernity, captures the tension between the desire for preservation of the authentic and the impulse towards progress. At one stage, when Singh wishes to photograph a local island boy, they argue when he tries to change into his Sunday clothes instead of remaining as Singh desires in his native homespun. Singh is critical of the boy's apparent shame of his primitive clothes and his wish to appear modern for the camera, right? He wants to look best, his best, right? But what Singh wants is what? The original costume, right? In his wish to appear modern for the camera and yet guilty through photographing him in the first place of interesting the conflict. Singh is aware of the power of the photograph. On a quayside in Aran, he takes out his wallet, the photograph, in order to quieten a crowd. In Kerry, he shows a picture of himself among marble statues in the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris, and is beguiled to hear a man muse that in those countries they do have naked people standing around in their skins, right? On his first visit to Iran in 1898, Singh bought a Lancaster camera from a fellow visitor to the island. It was a heavy box camera holding 12 quarter plates, which were later developed by his nephew, Francis Edmund Stephen. Later, Singh owned a Kilto box camera, which he used to take 53 photographs of Iran, the baskets in Galway city, later published by Lillo Stevens. It was mostly from Singh's photographs that Jack Yates based his ink illustration, which accompanied both the travel essays and the Iran Islands. It's interesting. Look for the photographs and compare the photographs and Jack Yates' sketches, how he changed. It would. I don't think anybody did it, right? While Yates' strong linear style complements Singh's written description of the stark yet robust lives of the rural poor, Yates' artwork, in turn, was influenced by Singh's photographs. The images, like Yates' drawings, are neither sentimental nor condescending to the life of a peasant. Instead, they both offer realistic and humane portraits of their subjects. Good paragraph, very good comments, right? Yet it would be a mistake to consider the Aran Islands primarily as an ethnographic text, a guidebook, even a travel essay. Unlike the travel essays, it contains a more sustained interior narrative and recalls the growing consciousness of a writer and the poet. This is true, right? This. What Singh has a photographer's eye for light and shade, composition, color, he has a poet's eye for description and ability to translate inner life into literal language. This is it, the essence of the travel book. The Aran Islands is also autobiography of an artist. As Singh steps on to the curragh that brings him from Inishmaan to Inishmaan for the first time, he experiences a moment of exquisite satisfaction to find himself moving away from civilization. In any real sense, Singh is not moving away, moving very far as he travels from one island to the next, but he is in fact sailing into a different landscape, the landscape of an artistic imagination. He found on Iran not merely an unfamiliar rhythm of speech, which he was to utilize in his plays and poetry, but something greater. Connection beyond language to a greater consciousness, awareness of abandonment, terror, limitation, joy, agony, despair, exultation of being alive. One dark night in Iran, he listens to the low rustling of the waves and the whistling and shrieking of wild birds, and is released into such an immense solitude that I could not see or realize that my own body. I seemed to exist merely in my perception of the waves and the crying birds and the smell of seaweed, the annihilation of body and the merging of the individual into an universal consciousness is an intensely felt emotional and spiritual experience. And what Iran in particular offered was a rich, imaginative scene of life out of which Singh produced a carefree, sustained meditation. Beautiful. Within the Bardic tradition of Irish language literature lies the concept of din sang sha, a recognition of the importance of praise, sometimes literally translated as topography. Din sang sha is more than the knowledge of local geography, but is leaning invested with the meaning and significance of nature, genealogy and memory. What the travel essays and the Aran Islands illustrate is not only the Irish landscape, capture the language, but is acceptance of mortality, beauty, fragility, death, and cyclical nature of life. Very beautiful essay, right? Good conclusion, right? So you can write like this, right? Like Elaine. Okay, we finished.